Day because it's an excellent independent media organization that highlights grassroots voices, bipartisan corruption, and gives by far the best analysis of the US empire. So please support the Real News Network by donating today. Your help means that it can keep being the premier media for the people, by the people.
Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Dharna Noor in our Baltimore studios, and we're live on Facebook and YouTube and therealnews.com and everywhere that you can find us. And we're live today because, as you probably know if you're watching this, The Real News is a nonprofit independent organization. We don't take corporate dollars or government funding. We don't sell advertising. And that means that we can really just be accountable to you, the viewers. And that's why we're doing this today, so that you can ask us about why we make real news. You can give us feedback about the way that we make real news, suggestions, questions, comments. So I'm here in the studio today with our senior editor, Paul J. Hey. Hi, Paul.
Hi, how you doing?
Man, this is weird. We've never done this before. I wanted to start by asking you something that a viewer actually put on a video that I did recently, a Baltimore story that I did, where I talked about the need for better policy that addresses water billing in Baltimore. And somebody asked, if you're doing this story, why are you focusing on building a climate crisis bureau? One of the big initiatives that we're doing right now at the Real News is building a climate crisis bureau. And they sort of asked, why do you need to build a separate bureau to address climate change and environmental problems when you yourselves are saying that these issues can't be addressed in a vacuum, that nothing should be siloed? Why do we need a specific bureau to address the issue of climate change?
Well, there's a difference between focus on producing it and how you display it, how you deliver it to viewers. There is a real problem right now that the main sources of climate news are on sites that are just about climate. And so if you're not engaged in the issue and you don't already go there or subscribe to their email or something, you barely run into climate news, period. We know corporate news is doing next to nothing. I think in 2016, during a presidential election year, the broadcast networks did about 56 minutes of news about climate, which included Fox and their denial stuff. But as we produce, if we don't have a single-minded focus in a critical area, it gets too diffuse. It's why do we create a Baltimore Bureau? Well, because you need a group who focuses on Baltimore. We have a group that essentially focuses mostly on international news, some national news. And you need people with, it's called division of labor. It's part of what makes human society and human civilization sophisticated. People have specializations. But when we display the climate news, it's embedded next to, whether it's a story about, I don't know, North Korea and another one over here about unemployment, things, especially things that people already consider of urgent interest to them or an urgent problem for them, that they'll keep bumping into climate news. So we don't silo it on our website. We don't silo it as we release it. But we need the focus to do it properly. And we think the Climate Crisis Bureau has, when we get funded properly, will actually be the same size as what the Real News is now. Real News now is somewhere 35, 36 people. I think the Climate Bureau should be 35, 36 people, and maybe twice even that, because it should be a full daily service, part of the Real News, but every single day stories about urgency and what do real effective solutions look like.
Yeah, and people often say that, because you can't cover these things in a silo, something that we can bring to the table is sort of showing the intersections between climate change and things like domestic policy, foreign policy. People often point to, the worsening of climate change, making more deserts in Syria, creating a bigger water crisis, which can worsen conflict there. So yeah, I hope we can bring sort of some cohesion to our coverage in that way.
And we really want to bring a sense of urgency to this question. Climate change is not just another thing on the grocery list of important issues. This is an existential threat, as I know you know, and anyone that follows this at all knows. But most of us aren't treating it that way, including us for a long time. You know in your head it's an existential threat, but because this thing isn't coming and actually hitting you on the head, it's someday in the future, you know, we're going to deal with it. And someday in the future, it's going to be important. But right now, we have so much geopolitical issues, threat of war, domestically, all the Trump craziness. You know, in Baltimore, you know, people are worried about a murder rate of 350 people or more. You're worried about, you know, just somebody who works there got held up at gunpoint in his own house, what, 2 days ago? Yep. And within the last 2 years, I think at least 2 of his family members have been killed. We've had at least 2 other members of Real News staff with people who were murdered. Now, you know, climate change seems pretty abstract when that is happening. That being said, it's not an abstraction. People need to get this is, you know, there is not going to be a real world, a livable world to live in for our children and our children's children, and already for many people around the globe, it's already unlivable. And the urgency of it is so existential, so threatening. You can't just treat it like another topic area. Like in the 2016 elections, even Bernie Sanders, when asked directly, will say the greatest national security threat is climate. But when he's out campaigning, it's another thing in the list. Sure. Now, I understand why, is because you're dealing with an electorate that's already, their opinions to a large extent, been shaped by mass media, by their own direct experience. And you're going out and you ask the people Sanders is trying to get votes from, you know, what's your top 5 issues, and a tiny fraction are going to say the climate crisis. So, you know, you sell blueberries to people that want blueberries. You don't try to give them strawberries. That being said, we're not running for anything, and we're nonprofit. So even though, like, Russiagate would boost our ratings, and if we jumped, you know, if we became another Rachel Maddow show, we'd probably make more money. Yep. But that's not our mandate. Our mandate is to tell people the whole truth, and the whole truth is the future that's being designed and is happening is one of science fiction dystopian character, where the elites head for the hills and have artificial intelligence that, you know, robots that make stuff, and the rest of the population, most of it, can go to hell.
Yeah, they don't really need us, so.
And that they are, you know, it was very interesting. There was, just a week ago, a Bilderberg conference. Now, I don't believe Bilderberg runs the world, but it certainly is a place where people who have a lot of influence in the world meet. And some of them are certainly in the very top layer of ruling elites. Their agenda was public. I don't know what went on there, and maybe there is some reporting on the web of what was actually discussed, but the agenda apparently was public. And number 3 on the agenda was the modern job crisis, or something like that, which essentially has to do with robots replacing jobs, right. I assume. It was the future of work, that was the title of it. Number 4 was artificial intelligence. In the top 10, you will not find climate change. The elites have decided there can't be seriously, they just won't do anything seriously about the climate change because it requires a true fundamental shift in how the economy works, how power is held. You know, it means you've got to take on the fossil fuel industry, which is enormous. Whole sections of Wall Street are completely tied up with fossil fuel. The arms industry certainly doesn't care much about the climate crisis. And well, who's the biggest user of oil? Even though the Pentagon's actually a little more green conscious than some of these politicians, the biggest user of fossil fuel, I believe, is the Pentagon. So the elites simply won't do anything because they figure, you know, we'll make a lot of money now, our kids will be okay, our grandkids will be okay, and you know what happens to everyone else and what happens next? Après moi la deluge, you know, after me come the floods. And they don't give a damn. So for us, we just look at the world and see what's the real priority here, whether people think it is or isn't. And so we got to do this prioritization. You can't do it without a bureau dedicated and focused and really properly financed. Like, we're going to spend a lot of time just trying to raise money so we can do this thing effectively.
And that's why we're doing this today. We're in the middle of our summer fundraiser here at The Real News. We're aiming to raise $200K, and you can help us right now. We have a matching grant. So if you donate $10, we'll get $20. And we would love it if you could donate every month if you're capable of doing that. Your monthly donations will be matched for the entire year. That means that if you're donating $10 a month, we'll get $20 a month for the rest of the year. So please consider donating to the Real News Network so we can keep doing this, build out our Climate Crisis Bureau, and keep reporting on domestic issues, foreign policy issues. I'm actually getting a question in now from Kevin Young in Northampton, Massachusetts, which I think is pretty relevant to what you've been covering lately, Paul. Kevin's asking, Democratic leaders and pundits like Rachel Maddow are attacking Trump from the right, accusing him of backing away from U.S. war games in the Korean Peninsula and giving security guarantees to North Korea, like giving up the threat of invasion and getting nothing in return. And these people are perceived as leaders of the resistance against Trump. So what do you think about this elite resistance against Trump? And how is this just like peace talks with perceived enemies in the U.S. of the past, like Iran?
A lot of layers to this question. Yep. Let me start with this. Why should the United States get anything back for agreeing not to attack somebody? Yeah. I mean, there is a United Nations. There is UN declarations, and in it, you cannot attack anybody unless you're under imminent threat. So you don't need to get something back to say we're not going to attack you, because by saying we're not going to attack you, you're just saying we're going to follow international law. What basis does the United States have so many troops in South Korea? It is ridiculous to think that the North Koreans are going to invade the South. And in fact, I did this interview yesterday with Aaron, and he played a clip from this, I don't know if he's a current or a former member of the general of the National Security Council, who says we're not there to help out of goodwill for the South Koreans. We're not there for anybody's goodwill. We're there for our own geopolitical, geostrategic advantage. Having so many troops in South Korea gives us a base to assert power in the region. That's why they're there. North Korea is supposed to give something up. They have no business being there anyway. Mm-hmm. You know, this is not about, like, if this is supposed to be to defend national security, the best way to defend national security is get the hell out of South Korea, and then the North Koreans won't feel so threatened, and they don't need to have all this bravado. Now, Rachel Maddow. Rachel Maddow is simply chasing ratings, and she's an extension of the Democratic Party corporate leadership. Because there are some Democrats that are actually supporting Trump's measures on these things, so it's not the whole Democratic Party. What she has become essentially a neocon. She is talking like a Lindsey Graham. She's talking like John McCain, both on her anti-Russian stuff and on the North Korean stuff, because for partisan advantage, and because she's so invested now in this anti-Trump foreign policy narrative, which means critique him on the Russia stuff, she can't come back from it. So her ratings life, her own economic interest is so invested, she can't be even rational enough to say that any kind of reduction of tension is a good thing. Now, do I think Trump's sincere about any of this? He might be a little bit sincere because his real target's Iran. He has not become a peacenik. Trump is a warmonger, and he has surrounded himself with the worst warmongers, you know, starting with John Bolton, who is a war criminal. John Bolton was the Undersecretary of State and responsible for proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And he was the one actually dealing with the material coming forward about whether there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq or not. Greg Thielman, who was the guy who was the head of, at least very senior, if not in charge, of analyzing the raw data that was coming from Iraq. I met with Thielman myself, and Thielman told me directly that he went in the first meeting with Bolton and gave him the analysis, and Bolton looks at it and he says, where's the weapons of mass destruction? Where's the nukes? Where's the chemical weapons? And Thielman said, well, we don't think there are any. And Bolton sends him back and he says, well, go look at the data again. This goes back 3 times
Wow.
Thielman says that he would go to Bolton, show him the analysis of the information coming from the weapons inspectors and other places, and say, we don't think there's anything there. 3 times Bolton sends him back, and then the 4th time they're having a meeting of the key people in that department, and he tells Thielman, we're not going to need you at the meeting anymore. You know, Bolton with Cheney, with Bush, but Cheney and Bolton were a particular connection. Not only are they both signatories to the Project for New American Century, which is this group that sends a letter to Clinton in '98, I believe it is, where they tell Clinton, now that we are the real only superpower in the world, we should essentially make it the world as we please, which was a regime change in Syria, regime change in Iraq, regime change in Iran, Libya, and they actually say in that document that international law might have been useful when there's 2 superpowers, but we don't kind of need it anymore. And of course, there's that famous line, I said this yesterday in the other interview, but it should be repeated. The famous line in that document is we can't execute on all of this because Americans have Vietnam syndrome. So we're going to need another kind of Pearl Harbor. It would take, to quote it fairly, I think it said, it would take another Pearl Harbor for Americans to support the kind of plan we're proposing. And of course, they got their Pearl Harbor on 9/11, and that's another conversation which I don't mind having. But this is the guy who's at Trump's side as he makes all these promises about North Korea.
Right.
So, one, there's no reason, like they keep saying, oh, Trump's not getting anything, Americans aren't getting anything. It's the other way. Why on earth should the North Koreans trust the Americans? They shouldn't. Not only should they not trust Trump, but the whole history in the since Bill Clinton has been promises to North Koreans that the Americans break. Yeah, maybe the North Koreans broke some too, but primarily the promises are broken by the Americans. So so then put Rachel Maddow in this context. It's vile, vile opportunism. It's the worst.
But okay, so you're saying all this, and I understand why you're saying that you're so critical of these peace talks, and you're sort of questioning Trump's motives here. But I mean, ultimately, are you like questioning whether or not this diplomacy is a good thing?
No, it's a good thing. It's a bet. Let's put it this way: the peace talks are better than war talks.
Right.
So even if Trump's intent is subterfuge, or maybe even some reality to it, like having some kind of deal with North Korea that makes him look good and maybe gets him nominated for a Nobel Prize or who knows what. That's okay because his main strategy is Iran. So one can even listen. Do I think it's a good thing that they met? Sure. It's a good thing that he laid out that it would be a good thing or proper thing to do for the Americans to cease the war and even consider ending the war games, even raise the issue of possibly bringing the troops out. Of course it's all good. Even if he never does it, it's good that he raised the bar in people's consciousness, right, that it's actually the right thing to do if the Americans are serious about peace. But saying that, we shouldn't forget who he is. Even like he says he wants Russia back into the G8 instead of G7. Well, that's a good thing. Why wouldn't reducing tensions with Russia be a good thing? Putin's a dictator.
Rachel Maddow might disagree with you there.
Well, so. Rachel Maddow and this guy, Don Lemon and some others on CNN, they can't say the word of the Korean leader without putting brutal dictator in front of it. They can't say Putin's name, mostly with the same words. It has to be brutal dictator. Okay, but why don't they say it about the Saudis?
Sure.
They never use the word brutal dictator about the Saudis. And the Saudis are at least as brutal as Kim Jong-un, and certainly probably significantly more brutal than Putin, but they don't want to say that.
Right. So
it's crass. It is so based on partisanship of the Democratic Party for Rachel Maddow, and she's like, what, the #1 rated cable show now. So throwing this kind of red meat out to her viewers seems to work for her. So they'll just keep doing it, even though it is such a distortion of what's actually good for the American people and what's actually good to actually fight against the supposed people she says she's against, including Trump.
Yeah, our host and producer, Aaron Mate, has been very vocal about criticizing her coverage, particularly on Russiagate. Could you talk a little bit about, to our viewers, about why Russiagate hasn't been like the focus of our coverage? Why aren't we making as big a deal about, you know, what could have been historic intervention in an election? Why is that not a big deal to us?
Well, there's two issues. First of all, there's an issue of principle. We should not take American intelligence agencies on faith. They have discredited themselves over and over again. Certainly with the Iraq War, we know how manipulated the intelligence was.
Sure.
So if they're going to ask the public to support something, they need to put into the realm of the public domain convincing evidence. And so far, most of what I've seen, and I haven't followed the way Aaron and some other people have,
is inconclusive.
But it's dubious. Like even take the attempted assassinations in England of this former Russian spy and his daughter. And it was immediately the story was only the Russians could possibly have this nerve agent. And then it comes out like a couple of weeks ago in German media, mainstream media, that actually there's a Russian defection in 1990, and he brought a general, and he brings with him some of that nerve agent, and it gets several NATO countries get it because they want to experiment on it. I don't know if they wanted to make it for themselves or they wanted to figure out some way to push back against it. I don't know. But the Russians aren't the only ones with it.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know whether the Russians killed this guy or not. You know, there's also arguments on the other side which don't make sense to me. Oh, the Russians couldn't have done it because that's not the way you do spy trading. Well, then there's a story out there, which is this guy didn't give up spying. He was working with British intelligence. The guy keeps working apparently with several other NATO countries' intelligence. And my understanding is once you do these spy swaps, you're supposed to go to pasture, you go retire. You know, you got out of prison, now lay low. And this guy didn't. Maybe that is a motivation for the Russians to do it. I don't know. I know there's a lot of stuff that we can't know because it's at a level of forensic science practically. So as much as the British, it's ridiculous for them to have jumped to some quick conclusions, we can't jump to quick conclusions the other way. But here's what we do know, and take the elections, because it's the same story. Was it a leak? Was it a hack? You get this one report, it had to be a leak because the amount of time it takes to download stuff from the internet, it couldn't possibly be a hack, and then that gets discredited by Scott Ritter, who was a weapons inspector, back and forth. I don't know. But honestly, and I'm talking personally to some extent right now, I don't care.
Yeah. Because
if the consequences of that DNC hack or leak is we found out about the sabotage of the Bernie Sanders campaign, and we wouldn't have known otherwise, well, that's a service to democracy. That's not an undermining of democracy. On the other hand, if, let's say, all these Russian trolls that got involved in all this individualized messaging that helped Trump win, my guess, from what I know, is if it happened, it was got orchestrated by Cambridge Analytica and Robert Mercer, who was the major owner of Cambridge, and Steve Bannon, and maybe they just went out and hired some Russian troll farms. Or maybe the Russian state's involved, although still very little evidence, because, you know, I can't remember the names of these things because I'm not as interested in the detail as some others, but Fancy Bear or something.
Yeah, Cozy Bear.
Cozy Bear, and there's another one. They have to be connected to the Russian state because some guy who's close to Putin is connected with them. But then you read, there's some counterintelligence narrative that actually there's no evidence that it's direct connection to the Russian state.
Sure.
I don't know. Here's what I do know. Whatever they might have done to American democracy pales in significance to gerrymandering, to Citizens United, to voter suppression. And
that doesn't even account for, you know, American intervention in other elections. Well, there's so much pearl clutching involved.
Another whole story. I mean, that hypocrisy is almost so obvious. It's like shooting fish in a barrel to even talk about the hypocrisy of the Americans. I mean, I've been cracking this joke all along, that the only reason the American elites are angry at the Russians for rigging the American elections is because it's the role of the American elites to rig American elections.
Right.
I'm not saying it's nothing. If the Russians really did, and the Russian state really got involved directly, and they actually had an effect, and it really helped Trump win, even if it wasn't the decisive factor, I'm not saying it's not nothing. It's a legitimate news story. It's of some concern, but as you say, the hypocrisy of it, given how Americans try to not just influence elections, but organize coups and overthrow governments, never mind just mess around in elections. But it takes our eye off what the real story is, which is the power of the billionaire class to determine the outcome of American politics at every level, whether it's elections or financing people. Like Robert Mercer's financing of Trump. Well, who else did Robert Mercer fund? This is just in case people don't know. Robert Mercer's has this work, Renaissance Technologies and the Medallion Fund. He was co-CEO of this company. I think he might have just left recently. But they were high-speed quantitative traders where they go in and they find with massive data analysis. And this is where Cambridge Analytica, that figures out how to do these individual election profiling. This kind of technology and ability to crunch data comes from Renaissance Technologies, where they have assembled 500 or 600 of some of the top physicists and mathematicians in the world to game the stock market, to figure out small variations in trends based on massive data and algorithms they write. And then you throw massive investments, and you come in and you come out, and you come in and you come out. It is the most parasitical form of finance you could possibly have. It undermines the stock market's role, which is pretty crappy to begin with, but they undermine whatever real role the stock market can play. It artificially changes prices of stocks. Like, it's pure parasitism. This guy Mercer is the guy that brings Steve Bannon into the campaign, because Bannon works for Mercer. Mercer was one of the primary owners of Breitbart, and now I think his daughter is. Mm-hmm. Kellyanne Conway ran Ted Cruz's super PAC on behalf of Robert Mercer. But who else did Mercer finance? John Bolton's super PAC. So the guy who is this crazy Dr. Strangelove, and he's not stupid. I've interviewed John Bolton. John Bolton's no idiot. He's an actual military historian and very bright and an out and out. I mean, he's as close to a kind of fascist mentality as you could get. This is the guy who's now at Trump's side as they make these foreign policy decisions. And so the power of the billionaire class and not just as a class, individual billionaires like Mercer and Sheldon Adelson are determining the outcome of who's in the White House, what is U.S. foreign policy. And of course, this all gets set up because of the Obamas and the Clintons, because they talk a good game, but life doesn't get better for people. And the wealth gap, inequality grew so much during the Obama years, it created the conditions for a Trump. Okay, that's enough.
We're getting, so just to sort of continue on this, we're getting sort of a related question from Sumara, who's in Jersey, on Facebook. That she's asking if we think that the progressive Democrats' pivot towards domestic policy like Medicare for all, free college tuition, ignores global policy. As in, are we seeing these sorts of domestic changes as happening in a vacuum? Like, you know, screw whatever happens in the rest of the world as long as it's better for us Americans.
Yeah. Yeah, there is some truth to that. In fact, I was saying that I gave a talk in New York a few weeks ago, and I started saying that, you know, $15 minimum wage, Medicare for all, some of these reforms, even issues like mass incarceration, they're critical issues, they're just issues. But if we stick to that, and we don't tell people the whole truth, the big picture of the moment we're in historically and how dangerous and threatening it is, then we're treating people like infants. And, you know, that's the way most union leaders talk to union members. They treat them like children. And they say, oh, they can only think about higher wages. You know, maybe all workers care about is, about, I don't know, how their weekends are or something. Like, they think workers are idiots and only care about the most banal stuff. It doesn't mean you shouldn't care about that stuff. Of course you should. But, if you don't care about the climate change crisis, if you don't care, for example, even this should be talked about because it is directly related to workers' interests, the hundreds of thousands of millions of jobs that are going to be lost because of artificial intelligence. I mean, what is it? Are we maybe 10 years away from no truck drivers, no taxi drivers, no delivery drivers, UPS? I mean, Amazon's already playing with AI drones for delivering packages. I mean, I'll go back to this Bilderberg thing. I think it was number 3 on that list of the Bilderberg agenda was the future of jobs, which means they're thinking about what happens to a society that doesn't need workers anymore. They are not thinking, let's share the wealth with the workers. No. They're sharing, how do we jettison the workers? How are we going to live in a safe space? It's Hunger Games territory. I mean, this is sci-fi, except this is now in actual sight on the horizon. And these guys, the elites, are actually talking about this. So, yes, we need, as the Real News, to report on these issues like, whether it's $15 or Medicare for all and all that. And yes, these are the things that get people actually engaged. Like the kind of things I'm talking about right now. It seems abstract. It seems so big. How can I do anything about climate? What can I do about artificial intelligence? Well, in fact, people can do because they vote. And when they vote, and when they hit the streets in large numbers, mass numbers, they can make demands about artificial intelligence for the people, not for you, not for the elites. They can make demands about, face up to the climate crisis. But the truth is, people are going to get more engaged on issues that feel more immediate. So both, they're just Medicare for all, but Canada's got Medicare for all. Does that make it some utopia? No, okay, it's a better healthcare system. I'm from Canada, and I know how much better it is. But that doesn't, Canada is not some heaven, far from it.
At the same time, though, I think I hear some people speaking about, domestic issues as though, because people will often say, and I think there's some truth to this, that, you're more able to think about issues like that seem less connected to your life, like foreign policy, like the climate crisis, if you have your basic needs met, if you're paid fairly, if you have, stable health care. But do you think that it has to work like that? Like first we have to get ourselves nationally up to a point where we have our basic needs met, and then we have to worry about everyone else?
Well, there's some truth to it, but I think the key issue is people who do see that foreign policy is just an extension of domestic politics. I mean, it's all about how stuff is owned and who has power, whether it's foreign policy or whether it's police abuse in Baltimore.
Or climate change, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's all the same thing, which is the elites are not fit to rule. And the elites have their interest. And foreign policy turns into wars, and war turns into ordinary people marching off to fight and get killed in war. Why? To get killed in war, to defend who owns property.
Sure.
I mean, it's pretty simple. It's oil and guns, and most people don't make money out of oil and guns. So yes, people will get engaged more, probably, because of these immediate economic issues. But every so often, it was the draft also got a lot of people engaged. The civil rights movement got a lot of people engaged. Anti-war movements have gotten the war. Movement against Vietnam wasn't just about the Vietnam War. It wasn't just about the draft. It's a combination of both. But the point is that it's up to us, I mean, at the Real News, and anyone else that gets this, is tell people the whole truth. And then, what I've been saying the last little while is that we're not in a normal moment of history. People have to know we're at an existential crossroads. The very existence of human society as we know it is at a crossroads. And everybody needs to hear that message over and over and over again. And when they vote, when they think about what to get organized about, even activists, what am I going to be an activist about? people need to know the whole truth. And if they think, oh, first I'll get people engaged and someday in the future we'll talk about, climate, well, then forget about it, because, by then it's going to be too late.
Well, so what issues should people be getting, or rather not be getting organized about, but what issues should people be focusing on? Like, we're getting some questions about the upcoming primaries. Our primaries here in Baltimore, early voting is actually starting today. Our primaries are coming up soon. And the two front contenders are Ben Jealous, who got Our Revolution's backing, and Rashern Baker. So what kinds of issues should people be looking for to distinguish between these candidates when they're at the voting booth or when they're, watching the news? What should people be looking for?
Well, let me first say, I haven't heard either of them talk about the big picture the way I think it should be talked about. They are doing, again, what Bernie Sanders did, at least for Ben, but for both of them, really, and most of them. They're talking about the very specific issues that seem immediate to people. And I understand, I guess that works. I mean, I never won an election, so what do I know about winning elections? That being said, I think people should focus on, and this is where I do think Sanders has made a real contribution in the political conversation in the country. He talks about the role of the oligarchy. And even to talk about class that way, and that the problem is the oligarchy, and people need to take on the oligarchy. That's a contribution, because this is supposedly a country with no classes. And Obama never wanted to talk about this kind of thing, and neither did the Clintons ever want to talk about this. It's kind of funny. Trump sometimes will, but it's as a populist nonsense, because he's clearly one of them. I'm not going to say which one in Maryland is more than less, and I haven't even paid enough attention in detail to even tell you really. Yeah. But pay attention to who's willing to take on the oligarchy of Maryland, who's willing to openly talk about taxing the 1%. Maryland used to have a millionaire's tax. I think it was about 6.5%. Like, we had an education forum the other day, and there was a question related to this, but why doesn't Maryland pass a millionaire's tax? Maryland, if I understand it correctly, has more millionaires than any other state in the country. This is one of the richest states in the country. Why not tax people with multi-million-dollar incomes and dedicate that tax to schools? And everybody knows better schools will lead to safer cities. Schools are the engine, in many ways, of all kinds of reforms in cities, and particularly a city that needs it so badly, like Baltimore. So I would say look at these candidates, and where are they on climate change? Do they talk about it? Do they have an actual worked-out policy on it? Where are they on taxing the wealthy? Because it needs to be more revenue. So whoever's saying tax the wealthy, I would suggest people support that. But also, you don't want to settle for slogans. Is there a real plan?
We're getting in a question from Russell David in Dorchester, Massachusetts that is interesting. I don't know that I know the answer to this, but he's asking, so looking at the size of the global working class, how many people on the planet have blue-collar jobs like manufacturing, logistics, fixing things? Is it more or fewer than a few years ago? And how is automation playing out in different countries and different industries? So in the US, there's an idea of deindustrializing, and then we hear that in other countries, they're industrializing. So I guess essentially he's asking, is the world industrializing? Is it deindustrializing or something else? Is the global working class growing? Is there less of a global working class?
Okay. I'm no expert. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. I can kind of talk about general trend here. I don't think there's any question that technological innovation is replacing jobs. And the only reason it hasn't replaced jobs more quickly, why there aren't more robots everywhere, is because with globalization, which was brought to a whole new level because of the digital revolution, because of computers. Amazon, you can order something from Amazon and 2 days later it arrives from China or Singapore or wherever. That kind of coordinated economic activity is also the product of technology, and Amazon warehouses are half robots now. I don't think there's any question that, one, there's less jobs of all types, not just manufacturing, because of technology, but something new's happening very recently. And the new is the cost of technology is coming down. The cost of AI is coming down. And there's a point where the technology gets affordable enough that even cheap wage labor can't compete with the robots. That's when you're going to start seeing a leap in the replacement of working people by technology. And we're on the cusp of that. In some industries, to some extent, it's already happening. But we're looking in the next 5, 10, 15 years of a massive switch over to robots. In every kind of sphere. They're even talking about robot doctors. And I was joking the other day, these people with hedge funds are so happy about all this, but someday they're going to be AI hedge fund leaders. And apparently that's already starting. But of course, these guys own these hedge funds, so they don't care if AI makes them the money. Then they don't have to share it with other brokers, so maybe they don't mind that either. The key point I'll make, and I can't answer any more in detail, but the key point is the system has reached a point of such irrationality. It is so crazy that robots are going to build all this stuff. Data is the new oil. Well, what does that mean? It means they can market stuff in a kind of sophistication they've never been able to. Except who the hell are they going to market to? Robots? You're going to have this explosion of productivity. You're going to have this amazing technology, massive unemployment, and nobody sells products to. So you get to this crazy dystopian Hunger Games model. Elites go seclude themselves, they wall themselves off, robots meet their luxurious needs, and the rest of the world goes to hell. There is no other way to go, except you have to change how these artificial intelligence is owned. Who's going to profit from this new technology? Like, you know, obviously, like Stephen Hawking said it, but lots of people have said it, and have said it for a long time. Everyone should benefit from this by not having to go to work.
Right.
I shouldn't say you don't have to go to work. You only work at what's meaningful. You work at work that enriches your life. And whether it's, you know, putting on a play or gardening or who knows what it is, you'll work because it pleases you, it's a contribution to society, but you don't go on assembly lines because robots can do it.
Right.
I mean, that's the other side of this technology argument. It's critical. The same technology that can give us this dystopian nightmare, it's probably redundant to say dystopian nightmare, but anyway, can actually give us a whole new human civilization. One, let robots do all the boring, menial work, and humans do all the creative, interesting work. And two, take on the climate crisis, because the sophistication needed to plan an economy to transition from fossil fuel to a green, sustainable economy, that's a massive transition. It's not just the political difficulty of it, given the interest, embedded interest of fossil fuel and others, but even just switching practically figuring out how to do that.
Sure.
Artificial intelligence is going to be a great boon to making that such a thing transition possible. And then the other piece, which I've been saying, is like a planned economy, at least to some extent, already exists. And it's called Amazon, it's called Walmart, it's called any of these big monopolies that are beautifully internally efficient and organized and rational, and they have this global supply chain that makes perfect sense, except the form of ownership goes back to slave society. I mean, it's private ownership that's this archaic, ancient form of ownership holding back this incredible modern productivity that could really make heaven on earth. I mean, in real terms. I mean, pretty close.
So nationalize Amazon.
Absolutely, or create a new one. You know, I mean, if depending, like, you can just hire all the, if you had a government that was willing to create a public sector Amazon, you don't have to nationalize it. You just create another one and hire all the senior people away, or you wait until the next big crash when a lot of these companies, like especially banks, their stocks are worth nothing, and just buy them up. You don't have to get into some direct confrontation about nationalization.
So, okay, so on the topic of automation and the way that it could affect the future of work, Nathan Kettle on our YouTube live feed is asking how a universal income can be used to help the masses in the face of an automated future. This is an interesting question. Chelsea Manning, who's running for Senate here in Maryland, has said in her campaign that, some progressives make too much of guaranteed employment, of a fair wage, because in the future we won't have to be worried about a fair wage. And she's pushing for a UBI or something like it. What do you make of this? What does that mean to you?
Well, again, not an issue I've really dug into. I know it's quite controversial on progressive side because sometimes this universal income is at such a low level, but it kind of takes away the energy of getting organized into unions, of fighting for higher wages. On the other hand, I don't see why there can't be a fight for universal income at a decent level. It would put pressure on the system to create jobs, because nobody wants to just pay people to do nothing, unless your robots are doing it. But until that situation, like when you really get into this future of technology doing most of the work, and if it's going to be in the public interest, well, clearly there has to be a way to share the wealth. And that, I don't know what else it would be other than, Marx had this concept, from each according to their work, to each according to their need. You basically, as long as somebody made a contribution to society of some kind, you get paid. I mean, even Roosevelt did that. I mean, Roosevelt, in his employment plan in the 1930s, was paying people to put on plays, paying people to write poetry. Why not? If it enhances our culture, enhances our society, there's enough wealth now to do it. You don't even have to wait for robots. Apparently, in the global capital markets, the amount of money available to invest in stuff, apparently is something like $350 trillion. The entire GDP of the United States, as far as I understand, is about 18 trillion. Global GDP is about 80 trillion. 350 trillion sitting to be invested. Now, some of it gets invested in a new shoe factory or something, but not most of it. Most of it is in
sitting.
No, not just sitting or gambling, derivatives. Speculating on commodities. One section of capital bets on another section. You can gamble on whether a block on the commodity future trading exchange. You can gamble on whether a blockbuster movie will make money or not. Of course, you can gamble on basic foodstuffs, and then whichever side of the you bet prices will go up, bet prices will go lower. You can actually see what you can do to manipulate those prices, and that happens all the time, including hoarding, where stuff is deliberately kept off the market to try to increase the price. And the system is nuts. It's always been irrational and nuts. There's nothing new about it. I shouldn't say always. Capitalism made sense for quite a while, but as we entered the 20th century, capitalism started not to make any sense. And the only way capitalism in the 20th century really resolved the crises was massive wars. Now, that's rational for humanity? You have a social economic system that the way it sorts out its internal contradictions is by killing millions of people? So it was already crazy. But add climate to that. Add geopolitical we're back in a multipolar world where we're starting to get back into pre-World War I kind of rivalries, even though the U.S. is very dominant. China's emerging as a big power, Russia to some extent. Europe as a whole is a big power, still in the American sphere, but who knows what the future looks like. You have these right-wing populist movements in Europe that are not only anti-EU, they're anti-American, and at least in rhetoric, but maybe in reality. This kind of Hitlerite politics could emerge in not just Germany, but in Europe again. This doesn't get talked about enough. The deterioration of nuclear weapons facilities is happening in the United States and in Russia. It's probably worse in Russia, but it's bad here. And we're still on a hair trigger alert. meaning that if a threat appears on this radar screens everyone has seen in the movies, apparently there's like 10 minutes to decide if it's a real attack or a glitch in the software. And apparently at least twice, and maybe there's more than twice and we haven't heard about it, they've come close to that 10-minute mark. These elites are not fit to rule. That's the critical issue. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking automation, whether you're talking technology, we're talking climate, threats of war, foreign policy, domestic policy, it all comes back to the same thing. They're not fit to rule, and what are people going to do about it?
I just want to remind folks that we're live on Facebook, YouTube, therealnews.com, anywhere that you can find The Real News. And part of why we're here today is because we want to be accountable to you, our viewers, and we're also in the middle of our summer fundraising campaign right now. You can actually donate just by texting TRNN to 33222, or rather 33222. And if you donate today, we have a matching grant. So if you give us $10, we'll get $20. We want to really encourage you to consider making monthly donations. If you donate $10 every month, we'll get $20 every month for a year. And as we're live on Facebook, we're getting some questions in. Aiden on Facebook Live is asking us a question that's particularly, I think, near and dear to my heart, which is, do you have difficulty in getting conservative opinions and debate on the show? And I'm saying it's near and dear to my heart because for a year here at the Real News Network, I was the chase producer, or the bookings producer, so it was my job to find people to come and interview and debate on the show. And I think sometimes the answer is yes, and not just conservative opinions. Sometimes it's also hard for us to find sort of liberal opinions, left liberal opinions to come on and debate on the
corporate dem
opinions. But even, I mean, well, I don't know. What do you think the answer is?
Well, the answer is yeah, we do have trouble, and we've tried over and over and over again. We're not big enough. Like, you know, before I did Real News, I used to produce a daily debate show on CBC in Canada. Because we were CBC, because we had such a big platform, everybody wanted to be on it, and it was easy to get almost anybody we wanted. One, Real News isn't big enough, and two, when people get a taste for how we do stuff, they're not comfortable dealing with us. See, the right is happy to argue and debate liberals, because the liberal argument is riddled with its own contradictions, and the liberal argument is, oh, let's get rid of some of the worst stuff we can see, but you know, the basics okay. Which is what Hillary Clinton said. Early in the campaign, she said, you know, I'm not against capitalism. I'm for reining in the excesses of capitalism.
Sure. Or how she said, you know, I'm not trying to make America already great again because America is already great, as though every policy that we've had has worked for the majority of Americans.
But when they say rein in the excesses, well, how many bloody years they've been in power? Where did they rein in the excesses? Like, how's that working for you? I'm all for reining in the excesses. I'm not one of these people that's you know, thinks the worse it gets, the better, and people will change things faster. I mean, I don't know if they will or they won't. Just examples where it gets worse and people don't do anything, and sometimes the other way. Our starting point, my starting point, our starting point, the Real News, is what's best for the well-being of the majority of people, whether it's short-term, mid-term, or long-term. So even a microscopic reform like seatbelts, it's a good thing. But I asked Ralph Nader when I interviewed him, you think you could have passed the seatbelt legislation now? He said no. He said he was in on helping create the EPA, several other major reforms. He says none of that could be passed now. Like even small stuff you can't get through because the power of parasitical finance and arms industry and other sectors of the economy, particularly them, fossil fuel. It's so powerful now. So much wealth is concentrated in so few hands. You can't even get little reforms passed. Next to nothing. The question was again.
Do we have trouble getting conservative?
Oh yeah. So the problem is the way we interview conservatives. We don't fight back with liberal interpretations of things, which they can then throw back in liberals' faces. We fight back with facts.
Sure.
And the facts destroy the conservative argument, because when the main way a conservative argues is like if you say to a conservative, I don't know, unemployment's bad, they'll say, well, look how bad it was under Obama.
Mm-hmm. And we'll say, yeah.
And we'll say, yeah, because
sure,
we're not Obama
sure.
defenders, and we're not Republican defenders. We're majority of the people defenders. And we'll go where the truth is.
And defenders of the truth. Yeah,
yeah, well, as best we can. We don't think there's an absolute truth, and we sure don't have the whole truth, but we're trying to tell the whole truth. And the real right-wingers are reluctant to come near us because we're not big enough that they feel they have to. But like you said, it's not just them. We have a lot of trouble getting corporate Dems to come on and debate and talk about these things because, why should they get shredded up? Because they will. We're not big enough that they feel they have to.
Yeah, sure.
It's not like we don't try.
We certainly do try. In fact, if you are a conservative and you want to come on the Real News and debate something sometime, you should hit us up and talk to us.
Let me add one other thing. There are a lot of times. This isn't about smart and not smart. There are some very smart conservatives who have done their homework and have a good fact base they build arguments on. I think they're missing a big piece of it. But there's times on certain issues which they're more persuasive than some of these liberals.
Yeah.
So it's not like we wouldn't give conservatives a fair hearing. We're not out to get them. We're out to get as much truth as we can.
Totally. And we'll admit we're wrong when we're wrong. So. Okay, we're getting lots of questions in from the live feed. Thanks for watching. Unlikely Ally from YouTube is asking so she's saying, I love your regular emphasis on climate change. Do you have any plans on exploring animal agriculture's leading role in the problem and making more plant-based choices to make enormous changes? So I think there's sort of two things in here. One is, yes, I think we do have more plans.
I think you should answer this question.
I think, well, we do have more plans to talk about the role of animal agriculture in this. I think, a lot of us are really concerned about the role of industrialized meat processing and the amount of emissions that can cause. The correspondent Dimitri Lascaris has really been pushing this, and yes, you'll see more of this from us in the future. But the other sort of question I think that's latent in this one is, do individual choices make a difference? And actually, I was vegan for a couple of years, and you and I used to sort of argue about this in a fun way. And I do think, you can make individual choices if they are the right ones to make, but fundamentally what we really need is policy change to address issues as big as climate change. I mean, it's like the shorter showers argument. Is taking shorter showers going to fix any environmental problems or a problem of lack of water? I don't know. What do you think, Paul, about the role of individual choice?
I've always had a problem because I'm I'm less now, but such a mediator that I always feel have a personal conflict of interest on this. I know the correct policy is a massive reduction in animal products in our diet from health point of view, and particularly red meat and stuff, but not just. And I also know that if enough money was put into it, you could really enhance plant-based substitutes for animal diet, and you wouldn't even taste the difference. So there's no question. Like when you say a green, sustainable economy, you can't say that without also talking about the role of animal products in our diet. It's one and the same question on every level. So yeah, we should pay more attention to it, and I'm glad we have people like Dharna here, who actually is a vegetarian and is also more focused on this than I am. But yeah, you can't separate the two.
Okay, we're getting a question from Nathan on YouTube about what a post-truth world is, and we're getting another related question from Miriam, who's asking if we think that fake news is really something worth fearing, or is it just an elite sort of moral panic?
Well, the question, of course we should be concerned about fake news, but who's the fake news?
Yeah, sure.
We know Trump is the source of enormous fake news, but I've been watching CNN the last few days, and the level of CNN discourse about Trump is every bit as bad as Trump. It's not almost as bad as Trump, it's as bad as Trump. And it's, Trump has his reasons for saying fake news. It's because it serves his interest to have his base distrust But frankly, if I had any sympathy at all for Trump and I watched CNN, I'd come out of it way more pro-Trump. I mean, last night, Don Lemon's on, and they're talking about Trump's accusations that the media is the biggest enemy of America, fake news, and Don Lemon says, isn't the real truth, the basic truth here is President Trump doesn't like truth? I mean, that's at the level of a 6-year-old, I don't even think my 5-year-olds would talk like that. I mean, the argument is so
You have
banal.
particularly smart 5-year-olds, but still, yes.
But I mean, it's so ridiculous, and like just the example of out of all these CNN people's mouths and MSNBC, they cannot say, you know, the Kim Jong-un's name without saying brutal dictator. And then they list Don Lemon last night. He lists the dictators that Trump is cozying up to, and they even put the photographs. And, you know, they have Putin and they have Duarte from the Philippines, but how come Saudi Arabia is not there?
Right.
And maybe there's some element of democracy in Israel, some formal, domestically, but the Israeli occupation is a dictatorship.
This draws back again the question of, I guess, the pivot to thinking only about domestic issues in a vacuum and whether or not it's possible.
Well, well, right now it's about the hypocrisy of the CNNs and MSNBCs and most, if not all, but most of corporate media. There's the odd journalist, individual journalist, working, you know, at a McClatchy or, you know, anywhere, even Times, I don't know. There's individual journalists doing good work. Mm-hmm. But cable news has deteriorated to absolute fake news. I mean, Trump's right about it. Mm-hmm. You know, it mostly is fake news now because the MSNBC and CNN are making so much money having a pissing match with Trump. They've just gone all in. Any semblance of journalism is just out the window. So he's right about them, and they're right about him. So they're all sources of fake news. But let's back up a step. Before you had this crazy Trump, CNN, MSNBC war, while there were certainly elements of real journalism in corporate television news, the lack of the most critical context gave it a kind of a fake news quality. And what I mean by that is if you cover elections and you cover any serious issue and you don't acknowledge and then deal with the consequences that this is a class society and people that own stuff have more power than people that don't, and we're not all in the same boat, and America's not all one little happy camp, and why can't we just get along and unite? I mean, how many times we saw this, even from like Jon Stewart's and others. Yeah. Oh, if we could just all unite. And the big accusation about Trump, he's divisive.
Yeah.
This society, because of how things are owned and how power is wielded, is divided.
Right.
It should be divisive because it is divided. It's like the big ambition in reforming policing in Baltimore is get people to trust police again.
Yeah.
Why? I don't blame individual policemen. In some cases, they're horrible. But as an institution, individual cops are enforcing completely unjust laws that reinforce chronic poverty. Why should you trust an armed force that's there to keep you poor and really doesn't give a damn about the murder rate in Baltimore, as long as it doesn't spill into white areas or even wealthier black areas, for that matter. So fake news starts with economic interest, and corporate media, television particularly, is deteriorating and deteriorating. Cable news is the worst. Network broadcast news is getting there in terms of these low, vulgar levels. But even in the good old days, they wouldn't talk about America as it really is, and that makes a lot of what they did fake and do fake.
So that's actually, we're getting an interesting question in from YouTube about why we chose to be video and why we chose to do things like this on social media, about what the role of video and social media will be in creating a new media future. Why are we video?
Well, it's a question we I know I debate with myself all the time.
Yeah.
Because it's a heck of a lot more work, and it's a heck of a lot more money. And the easy, natural audience for us is easier to get in print, in text. I shouldn't say print, in text. Because the more politicized stratum of people, of the population, reads. They come from a more educated culture. They're used to reading. Frankly, reading's faster. I find myself, I'll even go to some sites like CNN's and others, and they'll have a video up here and I'll read because I don't want to take the time to watch the video. And I know what happens on our site. It's hard to tell, but I'm sure a significant number of the people that come to our site jump and read the transcripts.
Yeah, sure. We know that that's the case. So.
Well, yeah, although not as many as we thought. Yeah. We did a survey a little while ago, and we found out something like 70% of people were watching the video.
Yeah,
maybe 30 were only
reading.
Yeah, watching and reading. But we believe it to be true, and I think the data bears it out. Working people watch more than they read. It's not that they don't read, but they watch more video, and the culture of watching television is where most people still get their news. And in fact, most people get their news from local TV news, as horrible as it is. So we wanted to fight and play in the field where most people get their news. But the way we've been doing our video news is not very well suited for most ordinary people. So what we're doing is contradictory, because while we're in a medium that really should be more popular, a lot of what we're doing are longer interviews and the more analytical. And that doesn't necessarily easy for people to engage with. So we're doing two things. One is when we do the more analytical, it needs to be better, clearer, more groundbreaking. And then we have to do more stories that have better storytelling, like 60 Minutes style even, where you do an investigative piece or you do a report, but the level of the storytelling is really engaging, because that's what it is about video that draws people in. Or, and this is, you get back to an earlier question, people do like to watch debate. Debate has inherent drama. And my show I did on CBC for, every night for 10 years pretty well, was a debate show. Then we get back to the problem. We're having real trouble getting conservatives and even corporate Dems to come on and debate actual, real progressives. Because they don't need to, because they don't feel we're a big enough platform. So this issue of medium, crafting our format better to the medium, we have to be better at, and we're working on it. But we did it for those reasons. We want to talk to a more popular audience.
Well, an interesting question from YouTube Live. Could you expand what your standard is for people you let go on the real news? Is being a pundit enough, a journalist, a YouTuber? How big should you be? How do we determine who we speak to at the real news?
We try to get people to know what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah.
We try to get people that analyze based on facts and don't do propaganda. We hopefully get people that are good on, how to deliver the message, because there's people that are good in writing, but they're just not good
at video,
on talking, or talking on camera.
Sure.
We try hard that if we're doing a story about a particular place, to get somebody actually from that place rather than somebody...
Or in that place.
Yeah, in that place, yeah. A lot of it's resource connected. Right now we've got like one person chasing guests. We'd be better if we had 2 or 3 people chasing guests. The quality of the interviews themselves would go up with another person or 2, so even our hosts had more time to prep and construct the interviews, if they're going to be interviews. Have more clips in them, would make them better. But being famous or having such and such profile is not the principal criteria for us. It's a criteria. I can't say that, if we can get somebody who's really well known, but only if they're also good. They got to know their stuff. And we interview, the majority of our guests are not famous. The majority of our guests are our guests because we think they know what they're talking about.
I'm sorry, somebody just commented on YouTube, video is so we can see Dharna's hair, of course, which I don't know if that's really why. So, okay, speaking to what we do cover, who we interview, being called out by Joao Oliveira on Facebook right now. He's saying, you hardly cover Africa. Any plans there? And I think that this is actually a very fair critique.
Agree completely.
Yeah, I think we both agree.
We a couple of years ago, we had a few African guests, and we really made a thing. We said we can't do all of Africa. There are so many countries, and every country, you can't talk about Africa like it's some one place or something.
Totally. It's not just that you have the Africa story.
Yeah, so I would say more often than not, we do keep up with South Africa. We have guests regularly. We know the South African story. The one I think we've been most remiss on in the last couple of years, because we really were on this for quite a while, was Congo. It's a massive country in terms of the, people talk about Holocaust and the suffering from war. And the Congo's something, what is over 6-7 million people have been killed in relatively recent years. American foreign policy has helped destroy the place. So we really need to get back on that, and it's that, again, we have so few people. We also have problem technically with Africa. We've often get guests, and the webcam connections is so bad.
True.
Like, we had a great guest in Nigeria we were trying to get regularly, and every time we got him, you couldn't see him, you couldn't hear him. I don't know. Anyway, whoever, couldn't get if that was a man or a woman, but whatever it is.
That's a man, I think.
Yeah, absolutely right.
I don't know.
We have Africans working for us. Actually, they should be screaming at us more. We have at least 2 or 3 Africans on our staff. Anyway, yeah, I'm glad you raised the question, and we will revisit it like in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, really, thank you.
Yeah, it's just, this is where, an earlier question, why are you having the Climate Crisis Bureau? Because certain things get lost when you get so inundated.
With everything. Sure.
And we should have an Africa Bureau.
Yeah, we could do nothing but.
Anyway, if there's anybody out there with enough money to pay one salary, American-style salary, or forget it, African-style salary, for us to hire a video journalist who could do stories like in Congo, that would be, I think, the best place, because South Africa, we can do South Africa. But if somebody out there wants to help finance that, then send me an email, send us an email, phone us. We will do it.
Yeah, and if you have resources to donate for all of us, we can do more coverage on everything if we have more resources, which is why we're holding this fundraiser this summer. We're trying to raise, again, $200K. We have a matching grant right now. That means if you donate $5, we get $10. And if you donate $5 a month, well, your funds are matched for the whole year. So if you donate $5 a month, we get $10 a month for the whole year. We're getting a question about engaging with communities nationally. So Jake on YouTube is asking why we haven't seen a determined push in engaging with communities nationally and a forum that facilitates some volunteerism. Here, actually, I think we aren't just thinking nationally, we're thinking, in some sense, globally. We have some amazing volunteers in the UK who have done great coverage for us. But yeah, I think, of course,
I didn't quite understand the first part of the question. Does he mean, what does he mean? What did the first part mean?
So why is it that we haven't seen a determined push in engaging with communities nationally? I think that...
Nationally means the United States.
Yes.
He didn't say internationally.
No, and I'm saying I think that we're not just thinking of this nationally.
But I'm trying to get at what the questioner's trying to get at. Because maybe what he's talking about is the only place we're really focused on locally is Baltimore.
Sure.
And so that's a complicated question for us. We see Baltimore as a pilot project of going local in other cities and hopefully many cities.
Right.
If we have a PowerPoint, and in our PowerPoint presentation, to funders, and we have never gotten enough money to do this yet. We want to have individual journalists doing local coverage in a lot of cities right away. We don't have the money for it right now. And again, if there's any community out there watching this that wants us to hire a local journalist, if you can raise the dough for a journalist, you know, who's got some experience, knows what they're doing, and can shoot and edit, we'll do it.
Definitely.
So if you want to do, I mean, if you want to have like a local fundraiser, I mean, I'll come, Dharna will come, somebody from Real News will come, you know, and you know, and all the money can go to just hiring a local journalist. We do it.
But Jake is also asking about
the volunteer part.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, been wrestling with this since we started.
Yeah.
You know, we're into, you know, we started daily production in 2007. To do a volunteer program, one, you need a full-time volunteer coordinator. And then you really need to work out what are people going to actually do. Because we've had over the years a fair number of people volunteer, and they kind of fade away because we're not very good at giving them stuff to do.
Right.
So then they figure, you know, you don't really need me.
Yeah, you need someone whose job it is to just communicate.
So we need actually people out there. Tell us how you think a volunteer program could work. I mean, we've been playing with the idea of local Real News chapters that are, instead of calling them a Real News chapter, maybe like we're playing with this idea of like community editorial committees, or even like just discussion, house party discussion forums or whatever, where people just say, okay, once every couple of weeks we'll watch some stories and talk about them. If there's enough interest in doing that, let us know, because you know we can also do stuff where, I don't know, let's say there were 5 or 10 of these kind of house parties on a day. We could bring them all together on Skype or Zoom, and then one of us or even one of our regular guests could interact with that. Certainly, again, that we need to filter the information somehow. We need story suggestions, but in the past, when we've asked for story suggestions, we get a lot of them, but most of them we can't do.
We can't do all
and then
of them.
People suggest and it doesn't get done, so then they don't want to suggest again.
Exactly.
I don't know. It's clearly an area we can grow in. It would engage more people. It would be good for us. But we got to figure out a way to do it where it strengthens us and doesn't just, you know, diffuse what we're doing. So yeah, so we need help. Anybody with suggestions how to structure a volunteer program, we're all ears.
And if you're here in Baltimore, I mean, we're here downtown.
Yeah.
So come say hi. We're getting another question about, so Paul, you and I were both on a forum at the Left or a panel at the Left Forum just a couple of weeks ago. And some folks watched that, which is on therealnews.com. You can check it out. So we're getting a question from YouTube. To clarify, does the Real News anticipate a sort of revolutionary reconstruction which centers around co-ops, community councils, the Real News? Could this bypass some of the conventional obstacles of party politics?
The Real News doesn't imagine anything, because the Real News is a journalist organization. So the Real News doesn't have a vision on these things. I'm happy to say what I think about them, but what I think about them is what I think about them. It's not, you know, we don't have a party line. This isn't a political party,
Sure.
And I don't know whether other people at the Real News agree or disagree with me. Some do, some don't.
Yeah.
But I can tell you what I think. I think the workers' co-op model is a vision of how property, an alternative form of how property can be owned. I imagine that in a future society, assuming we get there, and I say that
With the climate crisis in mind.
and other threats, it will be one form of ownership. I can imagine that one of the things to avoid in a society where the primary ownership is public, you still have to avoid concentration of ownership. The Soviet model, clearly, where you have so much concentration of ownership in a single party that controls the state, monopolizes political power in an undemocratic way. This, to some extent, or maybe as much, or even worse, than private ownership. But I don't think there's any question public ownership is the only way out of this crisis. So you need public ownership at a national level, as whenever something can be owned in a more diversified way by states or by cities or workers' co-ops, like the more you can diversify. And the issue's changing now, I think, because of artificial intelligence. Certain things needed to be at national scale to have a rational system, like the post office. With AI able to coordinate things in such a miraculous way, you may not need national scale to have efficiency and organization. You could have all kinds of forms of ownership well coordinated because of AI. Now, I don't know how far off that world is, but in terms of, I do not think that a quantitative building of cooperative economy leads to a qualitative leap to a more democratic politics. We have Mondragon in Spain, and it's it's enormous co-op. It was a large multi-million dollar co-op with thousands of jobs. I don't think it's done much to change the politics of Spain. And number two, in some sectors, well, first of all, it's a good example. They had to close, Mondragon had to close their electronics division a little while ago because they couldn't compete with the cost of electronics from Asia. So, you know, you can create a co-op, but you can't get the co-op out of the capitalist world.
Where you have to compete with.
You got to compete.
Not co-ops.
And that's not to say it's not a good model now. To the extent co-ops can be developed, it's a positive thing. To the extent that they work, and I should say, people are talking about the talk Gar Apurovitz gave at the Left Forum on the panel, but go back and watch the interviews I did with him, because I did a whole Reality Asserts Itself series with Gar, and we discussed exactly this there, and he agreed with that. That the co-ops alone does not change who controls the politics. It's a positive development. You know, it's another way to show ownership. It's a way for workers to have more power within enterprises. But to think it's going to change who has real political power in this society, you know, and who controls the guns, which is where the political power, you know, ultimately ends up, it ain't going to do that. You know, there's going to be a massive democratization where people elect candidates that really defend people's interests, and massive activity in the streets. There has to be, you know, you can't have a progressive come to power and not have massive street presence to support that progressive in power. You know, a mass movement, mass protest without an electoral strategy begs the elites for favors. Demands, be nice to us. But they are who they are. So you may win a little bit of demands with a big enough protest, but you ain't changing the fundamentals.
Yeah, sure.
But an electoral strategy that can't call on mass protests to support critical pieces of legislation will be impotent, because the forces, the power of finance and the political elites, what they can throw at a progressive city council, whatever, is also enormous. So both things have to go. That process, the co-op movement, it's a piece. It ain't the answer in as of itself. Let's put it that way. And Gar agrees with what I just said.
So, okay, so on this question of electoral politics, we're getting a question in from R.D. Patterson on YouTube on what our take is on the Green Party as a viable national party. So
again, the Real News has no take. And we interview Jill Stein, we interview Green Party candidates, and we try...
Bernie Sanders.
Well, but that's about Green Party.
No, I'm just like, we're not...
No, but
we're
I'm
not
saying...
going to pick the one, is what I'm saying. Like,
well, yes and no. But do we cover Green Party as much as we covered Bernie Sanders? No, we did not. Yeah. So now, as a news judgment is one thing, and then partly it merges, I guess, with a personal judgment, because I am the senior editor, but I think most of us had the same feeling about this. The fight within the Democratic Party of this Sanders progressive wing is a critical fight within the state. The Democratic Party is an extension of the American state apparatus. It's not like parties even in Canada or even the UK, which are also kind of, but not like here. Like the fact that a nominee of the Republican Party is already briefed by the CIA before they're elected because they're inside the state apparatus. So to have a fight within the state apparatus at the scale of what that Sanders fight was, I think is good for the people. Do I think the Democratic Party can be reformed? I don't know. My guess is it breaks up in a way before it really gets reformed, because I think the sections of the oligarchy that control the party apparatus, it will be, over their dead bodies that they would let go of this apparatus willingly. But will they let the facade, the structure of democracy within the party completely collapse through shenanigans of trying to undermine and destroy a progressive candidacy? And to some extent, they did last time, to some extent, and maybe more than some extent. But it's still a fight that needs to be waged because of where the political system is right now, that a third party, whether it be Green or something else, cannot get any traction because corporate media will not allow it. Because corporate media, to a large extent, is an extension of the state.
Of the two-party system.
Of the state. Sure. Where the ownership, private ownership ends and almost direct state interest picks up is very blurry, because the same people that dominate the state are the same people that dominate the media.
Right.
So, if there was a fight going on in the FBI, I'd say great. If there were progressives in the FBI, I don't know. And there have been, I don't know about the FBI, but there have been in the CIA, people that have blown whistles and been really concerned about the direction. A lot of the CIA didn't like what happened under Bush Cheney and the way the intelligence got manipulated. So the Green Party or other smaller parties, I think, are great. I think they should be encouraged. I think they raise policy issues that need to be heard. But people doing it should not be sectarian and trash people who are fighting in the Democratic Party, and vice versa. Pick your place you want to fight. If you want to fight it at the level of Green Party or another, good. And because within the realm of the Green Party, you can articulate more of a full-blown progressive concept
than you ever could in the Democratic Party.
Yeah. Well, I actually think Sanders could go further than he does,
Sure.
But still, it's hard to critique Sanders in the sense that who the hell else has broken through the way he broke through? And he has his own limits, even in terms, in my opinion, even in terms of how he sees the world.
Sure.
I still think it's better now, but he had one foot in Cold War mentality himself for a long time. Anyway, but I don't think what the Green Party does rises to the level of significance of the fight within the Democratic Party and what that means in terms of people learning about the system. And if, in fact, a Sanders type, or at all these other levels of primaries that are taking place, you can have a shift. Certainly at the congressional level or state assembly levels. If this fight in the Democratic Party starts pushing a more progressive kind of elected official, well, that's a good thing. Now, if there's places where the Greens can do that, well, that's a good thing. And we should stop, excuse the language, we need to stop the sectarian shit. Like people that call, Sanders someone who's shepherding people back into the Democratic Party, and the people that do it are sheeple. This is terrible sectarian language. First of all, even if it's true, you think you're going to teach anybody talking that way? And number two, there's a lot of very conscious people involved in that fight in the Democratic Party who do not have illusions about who and what corporate Democrats are and how the extent to which Wall Street controls that whole section of the Democratic Party and the extent to which the Clinton and Obama section of the party are part of the oligarchy. They're part of the opposition. Lots of people in that fight understand it just as well as people that are working on the Green Party and other party stuff.
Yeah,
and have chosen this as a battleground. And it's an important battleground, and let's not trash each other.
Sure. Okay, quite a different question from Facebook. This is the question is about the question of American power changing fundamentally. So this person is quoting Yanis Varoufakis in The Guardian, where Varoufakis said, if the U.S. can no longer stabilize global capitalism, Trump may as well blow up existing multilateral conventions and build from scratch a new global order resembling a wheel with America as its hub and all other powers in its spokes, an arrangement of bilateral deals that ensures the U.S. will always be the largest partner in each and thus be able to exact a pound of flesh through divide and rule tactics. So the question is the fundamental nature of American power changing in terms of how it relates to other capitalist countries or capitalist powers, Cold War eras, or a Cold War era allies, or are we just seeing more of the same underneath this nationalist posturing?
Well, I don't think Trump has thought this out like this, that Trump is somehow consciously engineering some new global structure. The concept itself seems a little contradictory, because if you're going to be the hub with all these spokes, you are still managing global capitalism. So I don't quite get where that's headed. The nationalist posture is not going to prevent China from becoming a global competitor and not going to be just a spoke in some American wheel. So I guess without having really heard that argument before and just giving an argument and a response off the top of my head, I think the whole thing's just way more chaotic than this. This is a system in stages of increasing dysfunctionality. This is a system, I think, I don't know if I was at the Left Forum or somewhere, they used to call imperialism the final stage of capitalism. And I say that final stage has taken a heck of a long time. But I do think we're in a kind of final stage of the final stage. And it can take a long time. The Dark Ages went on for a long time. This can take a reverse, but it's a reverse into chaos. It's a reverse into the effects of climate change, millions and tens of millions of people unemployed because of AI. This is dystopian crazy shit. This isn't let's reorder with this nice plan of a spoke and a hub and all this. But the serious question in there is, can the United States continue to be the manager of global capitalism? Now that's a real serious question, because the Trump faction will not and cannot and doesn't want to be. They just want to pillage and plunder. It's hard to believe that this Trump group would have used the Fed to loan money to European banks and companies. Now, maybe they would have been forced to by Wall Street, because Wall Street maybe would have said to them, your nationalist shit is all fine and good to get you votes, but when it comes down to whether you're going to actually threaten our global finance system, you're going to listen to us. That's very likely what might have happened. But finance itself, American finance itself, won't allow itself to be regulated at all. And they like that Trump is deregulating even the modest Swiss cheese hold Dodd-Frank regulation there was. So how can a financial sector that's so out of control themselves, how are they going to manage global capitalism? And let's not forget, Trump is a legitimate representative of a large section of Wall Street. Not just Mercer, but Wall Street as a whole, with exceptions, loves this guy now. Deregulation, tax cuts, orgy of profit making. So Trump or no Trump, is the American elites that did play this role of managing global capitalism, especially since World War II. Can it still play this role? It's a real question. And if they can't, look out. Because what happened in 07, 08 could have been far worse for people than it was. As screwed up as I think Obama did it, because so much of the benefit of how they stopped the recession being the Great Recession, or however people like to formulate it, and so much inequality, and Wall Street didn't go to jail, and blah, blah, blah. All true. But it did stop an unraveling that could have happened if they didn't play the role they played with the Fed and so on, quantitative easing and all of that. If you had an extreme nationalist position at those moments, rather than Obama with some what's good for global capitalism vision, it's not like that would have been a good thing for us. You know, there would have been massive unemployment. We would have been back into 1930s and perhaps worse style for maybe a decade. But can they play that role again? I don't know. The fact that they're getting along with Trump and that they're okay with this craziness, the tax cuts are insane. They know that. Deregulating Wall Street is literally insane. I mean, they know that. They don't care. They're just making so much money, they don't care.
So again, we're live on Facebook and YouTube and therealnews.com, and we're doing this because we're in the middle of a fundraiser where we're going to raise $100K from y'all, and we have a matching grant.
Hey, let's do it right now. 100K.
Yeah.
Donate right now, and then we won't have to ask you for money again.
Yeah, exactly.
For at least a month or something.
For at least a month or something. Yeah, and then we can all get paid to do this and continue to make more real news. And so, okay, we can take a couple more questions. We're getting still some questions in from Facebook, from YouTube. On what you were just talking about, we're getting a question from Ricardo on Facebook. Do you think that China and Russia will allow the U.S. to meddle with Iran's national security?
Yes. They already did. When there was no evidence of an Iranian nuclear weapons program, and we know that the American intelligence agencies, what was it, 2007 or 8, actually had a national intelligence estimate which says there hadn't been a weapons program in Iran since 2003. Frankly, they didn't know for sure there even was one pre-2003. There was a likelihood, they said. I don't know whether there was or there wasn't. But they still got sanctions passed. They still had all this punitive measures against Iran that Russia signed on for. China didn't oppose it. Yeah, I actually been saying this from before Trump was elected, that I thought the plan was make a deal with Putin, the Trump plan. And this is not just Trump, the people around Trump. The plan is make a deal with Putin and open up a big energy play for Exxon in Russia, lift the embargoes and punitive measures against Russia, give Syria to Russia, just back off and let Putin and the Russians essentially do what they want, defend Assad, get rid of ISIS, and let Syria be under the suzerainty of Russia. And in exchange and forget about Crimea. Exchange for that, nobody, the Russians or Chinese, put up much of a, maybe some rhetorical propaganda position, but neither of them do much about Iran. Because if they destabilize, threaten Iran, what happens? Well, especially for Russia, first of all, the price of oil goes up. So everybody got oil benefits. So the Russians do very well. Number two, where do the Iranians go for help or anything? They got to fall into the arms more of Russia. There's nowhere else. So, any attack, destabilization, push against Iran pushes Iran closer to Russia and China. The Chinese are not going to get into any confrontation with the United States directly. That's been their policy for decades. They're not changing it. It's working for them. They knew how screwed up the Iraq war is. They didn't stop it. The Russians knew how screwed up the Iraq war is. They didn't do anything to stop it. And even when the war was over, clearly an illegal war Did Russia or China put forward a motion in the United Nations to condemn the United States as war criminals? No. Yeah. Everybody's ready to do business again. China is a state capitalist country. Russia is a capitalist country of oligarchs and a strong state too. And they're all in the same kind of imperialist camp, if you will. Mid-level powers. China's more than mid-level, but still mostly regional, but may compete globally someday. No, they're not going to push back on Iran. Maybe with some highfalutin language, you know, oh, don't do these things, but nah. And the Americans know that.
So again, we're live here on Facebook and YouTube and therealnews.com. Please consider, if you're watching this or you watch The Real News, donating, subscribing, becoming a monthly donor. Right now we have a matching grant, so anything that you give us, we'll get twice as much. If you donate $10, we'll get $20. If you donate $10 a month, we'll get $20 every month. So here's a nice question to end on. Folks on YouTube are asking why we started The Real News in the first place and how it began. So they're saying, I know that it was you and Sharmini Peers who began The Real News, and they say, I think you started in Canada, but how and why did you start The Real News?
Well, I was producing this daily debate show on CBC, and 9/11 hits. And then to lead up the invasion of Afghanistan, invasion of Iraq. But you could see that the Bush-Cheney administration coming to power represented the far-right fascistic side, overtly fascistic side of U.S. power coming, of U.S. elites coming to power, and the extent to which the media normalized it. Again, this is not to say that the corporate Dems don't facilitate all this, they do. But still, there's something specific about this far-right billionaire class represented by politicians like Bush Cheney or McCain or Lindsey Graham's and a bunch of other ones. And they merge between fossil fuel industry, arms industry, and other sectors, finance too. So I saw this happening. And I'd been doing this debate show for 10 years, daily for 9 of the 10 years, weekly, I guess, for the last year. And honestly, the last thing on earth I wanted to do was another media project. And even more than, eh?
What did you want to do?
Make a film. I had a film all worked out. I was going to do a film called 2020, where it's incredible how we're almost there.
Yeah.
And it was a film about a documentary filmmaker uncovers a conspiracy to overthrow the new socialist government of Brazil. And I had the whole story worked out. And I want to do some writing, because as everyone at The Real News knows, I'm a terrible manager and can't stand it. And you know, at Counterspin, I had a staff of 35, 40 people, and I just want to do my own work. And but I could see this thing because of I saw what happened with the Howard Dean campaign, how they could raise money on the internet. I wasn't just doing this debate show. I don't know if people know my history, but my main thing was actually I was a long-form documentary filmmaker. And I was making films for A&E and Turner and CBC and BBC and RT. I was in like a top-tier circle of global documentary filmmakers, you know, with $1 million budgets and stuff like that. But it was getting increasingly frustrating, even in the documentary world, the sort of influence of reality TV. It was so dumbing down the kind of films you could sell. And honestly, the quality of the commissioning editors. I mean, I started the Hot Docs Documentary Film Festival in Toronto, which is a big festival now, and I was the chair of the board for 5 years. But I got to know all the commissioning editors, both as a filmmaker and through there. And with a couple of exceptions, they were hacks. You know, just looking for ratings. And it was the whole pressure of this hyper-capitalism that The idea that there should be a public interest was, you were stupid if you thought that. So you might as even at the level of commissioning editors, oh, you just get films to get ratings, you know. So actually the idea for the Real News started not as a news thing. It started to be, in 98 or 99, I guess it was, the first thought about it was, let's create a internet-based funded documentary channel to fund good documentaries. But as I'm doing this daily debate show, I see the power of daily news. And as much as we were quite influential in Canadian politics, we were on at on the CBC News Channel. We were on 8 o'clock and 11 o'clock, 5 nights a week. We were a big deal. Two things happened. One, it's so frustrating that we would, for example, clearly have a debate where clearly the winner was the people representing the position, there's no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Except the next night on even CBC News, they're repeating all the bullshit from the State Department. Then the second thing was that, well, first of all, the power of daily news to shape the narrative was so critical. And then two, the way the American media so capitulated, some independent media, of course not, I'm talking corporate media, so capitulated to the White House in the lead up in the Afghan war and Iraq war and just participated in the lies and all the rest. And you could see that the fascization of the United States in particular, although this influence is Canada too, but the process of the fascization of the United States was speeding up. That as bad as things had been in American politics, you know, the upsurge of the 60s and the mass movement and so on, it's not to say you didn't have right-wingers in power and this and that, but, you know, even people now say, you know, legislation passed under Nixon to some extent was more progressive than was passed under Obama.
Yeah.
But this process of fascization, and I don't think I understood it as well as I do now, but it's very linked to the power of how corrupt, degenerate, parasitical finance is getting. As that process develops, and this is a process that happens spontaneously within capitalism. It's not, oh, let's sit back and make finance more powerful. It happens. It happens because, first of all, large-scale industry requires massive amounts of capital. Global trade requires banks and institutions to deal with even more massive amounts of capital. And the digital revolution means you're not doing all that with a pencil and paper anymore, which changes the whole quality and quantity of global finance and global production. So it's so easy now to play Chinese or Filipino workers off against American workers and drive people's wages down. It can be done at such a scale with such sophistication. The political reflection of that concentration of ownership is fascization, undermining democracy. So you get the Citizens United decision. I mean, it didn't come out of nowhere. Even Clinton getting rid of things like Glass-Steagall. It's not Glass-Steagall unleashed finance. It was finance became so powerful, it forced the system, the White House, which previously had understood there needed to be some mitigation of Wall Street or the system itself gets threatened. Finance has become so powerful, they get Clinton to say goodbye to that and a bunch of other stuff. And even now, that they're allowing AT&T is going to buy Time Warner. Why is there antitrust legislation?
Yeah.
No, why? There's antitrust legislation to save capitalism, so it works. Because if it gets too monopolized, it loses that competitive factor. And the system gets paralyzed. Monopolies will dictate prices, and they'll dictate politics. The more ownership gets monopolized, the more the process of fascization. So I'm seeing this post 9/11, and I get fiddling around with the idea of the Real News. 2000, I made this film, Return to Kandahar, in 2002. I went to Afghanistan, and I saw, you get out of this North American bubble, There's one moment, in some ways I hadn't really connected these two things until right now. We're in Mazar-e-Sharif in northern Afghanistan. Last day we're leaving. And we're outside the main mosque, this gorgeous blue mosque in Mazar-e-Sharif. And there's this older beggar and a young beggar. And the old beggar the young kid comes too close to his territory, and he takes his crutch and he splits the little kid's head open. He's maybe 12 years old. Like really, like the skull's open. And nobody does anything. So we run over to him, get the kid, try to cover up the head with the blood gushing out, drive him to the hospital. And we get to the hospital, and the doctor starts putting a bandage around his head. And through the translator, I said, "Aren't you going to stitch it up?" He looks at me and says, "We don't have suture." "You don't have suture?" "No, we don't have any suture." I said, "What do people do?" He says, "Well, if they can afford it, they go to the pharmacy and buy suture. And they bring it down, and then we do it." I said, "Okay, wait. So we run to the pharmacy, we get the suture, and he does it. I mean, the kid would have died for sure, because the infection would have, there's no way. Because also, no antibiotics.
Yeah.
So the kid would have been dead without any doubt. Anyway, the story goes on, but I return from Afghanistan and see the utter destruction of this place. So many stories like this little kid. And I can see what the real news maybe could be. And I got to decide, do I want to make my film and do what I really want to do, or do the real news, which I don't want to do, but I can see it. And if it works, it could be really meaningful. So I've learned one thing in my life, that if I don't do the most meaningful thing I can do that I see, I ain't happy, even though the alternative looks like it would be
more fun.
Even kind of more personally fulfilling.
Yeah.
So we did it. I did it because I had to do it. I could see it, and once you see it, you got to do it. And it goes in kind of a broad way for anyone that sees the situation we're in and doesn't act and just goes on normally because I'm all right, Jack. It will, even at a most personal level, will come back to haunt people, because once you see it, you got to do it.
And we can't do it without the donations from our viewers, like you. And that's why we're having our summer fundraiser. And right now we have a matching grant, so if you give us money, we'll get twice as much money. Yeah, if you have more questions, I'm sorry, there's hundreds of questions and we couldn't get to all of them, but we can do this again. Obviously, always feel free to make contact. Keep watching. We'll try to address as much of what everyone has said as possible.
Yeah, if people want to do this, we can even do it once a week or whatever. Just let us know if you find it interesting.
Yeah, tell us if you want us to keep doing this, and we'll keep doing it if you want. All right. Thanks so much for being with us today on Facebook Live and TheRealNews.com and YouTube. I'm Dharna Noor. I'm here with Paul J., our senior editor. Yeah, thanks for tuning in. See you later.
Now more than ever, we need independent and critical and progressive voices. That's why I'm asking you to pledge immediately, if not sooner, a major donation to The Real News. When The Real News is thriving, that means the progressive movement is thriving.